The moment Roman Fletcher stormed out of the coffee shop, cursing under his breath and barely noticing the barista calling after him, he had no idea he'd just left behind the thing that would change his entire life. Vivienne Hart was sitting alone at a corner table with her half-finished latte and a rejection email still open on her laptop, when she saw an expensive-looking leather notebook left abandoned on the chair across from her. Everyone else in the place was too busy scrolling on their phones to notice, but Vivienne had always been the kind of person who noticed things. She glanced toward the door. The man who'd been sitting there earlier, dark suit, sharp jawline, and the kind of presence that made people get out of his way, had practically flown out the door 5 minutes ago like something was on fire. She hesitated for a beat, then picked up the notebook. It was heavy. Real leather. And when she flipped it open, her breath caught. It wasn't just scribbles or grocery lists, it was pages of detailed business plans, company projections, and hand-drawn flowcharts with titles like Q3 merger strategy and confidential board eyes only. And the signature at the bottom of one of the pages, Roman Fletcher. Vivienne's eyebrows shot up. She didn't know much about CEOs, but she knew that name, Fletcher Industries. One of the biggest tech companies in the country. It was all over the news last month when they announced a 10-figure merger deal. This wasn't just some guy who forgot his notebook. This was a billionaire who accidentally left behind his entire brain on paper. Holy crap, she whispered. She looked around, unsure what to do. She could leave it with the staff, but what if they didn't return it? What if someone took a photo of the pages? This wasn't just a notebook. It was a gold mine. Vivienne stared at the address printed on the letterhead stuck between the pages, then closed her laptop, grabbed her coat, and marched out the door with the billionaire's notes under her arm. It took a train ride, a transfer, and a whole lot of anxious pacing in front of a sleek glass building downtown, but she eventually found herself in the marble lobby of Fletcher Industries, standing in front of a suspicious receptionist who looked like she was trained by the FBI. I found this, Vivienne said, holding up the notebook. Mr. Fletcher left it at a coffee shop this morning. I figured he might want it back. The receptionist narrowed her eyes. And you are, Vivienne Hart. I'm not anyone important. I just didn't want something this important falling into the wrong hands. There was a long pause. Then the receptionist picked up the phone. 10 minutes later, Vivienne was ushered into a private elevator, clutching the notebook like it might explode. Her heart pounded as the elevator doors opened into a penthouse-level office that looked more like a luxury condo than any workspace she'd ever seen. And then he was there, Roman Fletcher. He looked even more intimidating up close, tall, broad-shouldered, with a face so sharp it could have been carved from stone. His suit probably cost more than her rent for the year, and the way he looked at her like he was trying to figure out whether she was a threat made her toes curl inside her boots. You brought this back, he said, voice low and controlled as he took the notebook from her hands. You read it, only enough to figure out it was yours, she said quickly. I swear I didn't. I believe you, he interrupted. Then, slowly, his expression shifted. Most people would have sold this to the highest bidder or leaked it. Why didn't you? She blinked. Because it didn't belong to me. There was a silence. Then something flickered across his face, surprise maybe, or curiosity. You got a job, he asked suddenly. Vivienne's eyebrows shot up. What? You working right now? She hesitated. No, I just got laid off. Why? Roman set the notebook down on the glass table behind him, then turned to face her fully. Because I don't meet a lot of people who do the right thing when no one's watching, and I need someone like that, she laughed, nervous. I'm not a spy if that's what you're thinking, he didn't smile. I'm thinking you're someone I want to keep close, Vivienne's heart stuttered. What does that mean? It means I'm offering you a job, assistant to the CEO, starting tomorrow. Her mouth dropped open. Wait, what? You don't even know me. I know enough, he said. You're honest, you're bold, and you're not stupid, or you wouldn't be standing here right now. Vivienne stared at him, stunned. You can't be serious. I'm always serious, Roman said. You're in or you're out, Hart, she swallowed. In? By the end of the week, Vivienne had gone from eating ramen in her tiny apartment to wearing tailored pencil skirts and riding in private cars to downtown meetings. Roman didn't talk much, but when he did, it was direct, intense, and impossible to ignore. He worked like a machine, always 3 steps ahead, never resting, and yet with her something shifted. He started asking questions about her life, her family, her dreams. "You always wanted to work in tech?" he asked one night after a board dinner, the two of them alone in the back of the car. "I wanted to be a writer," she said, "but I got tired of rejection letters, so I started temping." Roman looked over at her. "You gave up too soon," she smiled, a little sad. "Maybe." "I didn't," he said quietly. Their eyes met. The air between them changed. Neither one of them spoke on the rest of the ride home. It had only been 3 weeks, but Vivienne felt like her whole world had flipped upside down. Roman was different with her, softer, more human. He bought her coffee without asking how she took it. He noticed when she was tired. He remembered her favorite music, her favorite candy, her favorite quote from a book she'd only mentioned once. And one night, after she stayed late helping him prepare for a big investor meeting, he walked her to the elevator and said, "You've changed things." She turned to him, confused. "What things?" "Me." The elevator dinged. She didn't get on it. They stood there, too close, too aware of each other. "Say something," he said. Vivienne's voice was barely a whisper. "I don't think I can pretend not to care about you anymore." Roman stepped closer. "Then don't." And then he kissed her hard, warm, real, and everything after that changed. Vivienne didn't sleep that night. Not because of doubt or fear, but because every time she closed her eyes, she felt Roman's hands on her waist, the press of his mouth against hers, and the way he'd looked at her like she wasn't just another assistant, another employee, another face in the room. The next morning, she stepped into the office with her pulse fluttering. But Roman wasn't at his desk. Instead, his calendar had been cleared, and his executive assistant, the one she technically worked under, told her, "He's in meetings off-site. You're on standby till further notice." She tried to focus on the presentation slide deck he had asked her to draft, but her thoughts kept drifting, not just to the kiss, but to how quiet he'd been afterward. He'd stepped back, brushed her cheek once, and said nothing before leaving her alone in the hallway outside the elevator. Now, with an entire floor of glass offices bustling behind her, Vivienne sat staring at her screen, wondering if she'd crossed a line neither of them could uncross. By the time the sun dipped behind the skyline, the office had mostly emptied out. She was gathering her things to leave when the elevator opened and Roman walked in. He looked tired in a way she hadn't seen before. His tie was loose, his sleeves rolled up, and there was a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there yesterday. Vivienne didn't say anything. She let the silence stretch between them, unsure what he wanted. "I need to ask you something," he said finally, standing in the doorway to her office. She straightened. "Okay," he stepped in, closing the door behind him. "You ever wonder what would happen if you let yourself want something too much?" Vivienne studied him. "I think about that every day." Roman leaned against the edge of her desk, eyes unreadable. "My father built this company from nothing. Grew up in a 2-room apartment in Detroit. Built every dollar with blood and grit. When he died, they handed me everything, but they also handed me chains. Expectations. Promises I never made but somehow still owe." She hadn't expected him to open up like this. "I didn't know," she said softly. "No one does. They look at the jets, the properties, the press. They don't see the cost." He let out a breath. "But last night I forgot all of that. I looked at you and I didn't think about boardrooms or legacy or what headlines would say if they saw me with an employee. I just wanted." Vivienne felt her fingers tighten around the pen she hadn't realized she was holding. "I'm not asking you for anything," she said, voice steady. "You don't owe me an explanation." Roman shook his head. "I'm not explaining. I'm telling you this isn't casual for me." She blinked. "It happened once, and I haven't stopped thinking about it since." He stepped forward now, slower than before, careful. "But I can't promise you simple. I can't promise you easy." "I wasn't asking for easy," she said. "I just want the truth." He looked at her like she'd said the one thing he didn't know how to hear. "I want to see you," he said after a moment. "Outside of this office, no titles, no rules. Just you and me." Vivienne's heart thudded in her chest. All right. Roman's jaw seemed to unclench slightly. Tomorrow night, I'll pick you up. She nodded, trying not to let the nerves show. As he left the room, she realized this wasn't just a date, it was a shift. A step into something bigger than either of them had planned. The next evening, just before 7, her doorbell rang. When she opened it, Roman stood there in a dark, tailored coat, holding a single white peony. For you, he said simply. She took it, stunned. You remembered, you said once they were your mother's favorite, she swallowed. That was weeks ago. I don't forget things that matter. They drove in silence for several blocks, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was thick with anticipation, with the kind of tension that neither of them could disguise anymore. When the car stopped, Vivienne looked out the window and froze. This is the Bellevue, she asked, her voice catching. The Bellevue was one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city, booked months in advance, the kind of place people wore designer gowns to. She'd only ever seen it in magazines. They're making an exception, Roman said, offering her his hand. Inside, the maitre d' greeted Roman like an old friend. They were led to a private terrace overlooking the skyline, complete with soft lighting, silver cutlery, and a string quartet playing somewhere just beyond the glass doors. Vivienne sat down slowly, trying to ground herself. This is surreal. It's just dinner, Roman said, watching her closely. That's like saying Versailles is just a house, she murmured. He gave a rare, genuine grin. You're different. I'm still trying to figure out if that's a compliment. It is, he said. People in my world. They play roles you don't. It's disarming. She tilted her head. And that's why you kissed me. His eyes darkened slightly. I kissed you because I couldn't not. Their food arrived, plates so artfully arranged they looked like paintings, but neither of them touched the meal. I've been warned about men like you, Vivienne said after a moment. The kind who live in boardrooms and break hearts before breakfast. Roman leaned forward, elbows on the table. I've been warned about women like you, she raised an eyebrow. Oh, the kind who see past the money and power. The ones who make a man forget the armor he's worn for years. They didn't speak for a long time after that, but the air was charged, full of unsaid things. As they left the restaurant, the sky had turned indigo and the streets glittered with city lights. Roman stopped beside the car and turned to her. I need to ask you something, he said. She met his gaze. You already did. No, he said. That was for a date. This is different. Vivienne's pulse jumped. I want to trust you, he said, not just with my company. With me, she didn't look away. Then don't hold back. Roman stepped close, his voice low. There's something I haven't told you, she braced herself. There's a deal going on, one that could change everything for Fletcher Industries. And someone's trying to sabotage it from inside. Vivienne felt the world tilt slightly. Why are you telling me? Because you're the only person I'm sure isn't lying to me. She stared at him, stunned. You think someone on your team is leaking information? I know they are, he said. And I need your help to find out who. Vivienne's breath hitched. You're asking me to spy on your own company. I'm asking you to help me protect it. She looked at him, torn. What if we find something you don't want to see? Roman's jaw tightened. Then we deal with it. Together. And for the first time since this all began, Vivienne realized this wasn't just a romance. It was a storm, and she was already standing in the middle of it. Vivienne waited until the door to Roman's car closed behind her before letting out a slow, steady breath. The air inside the cabin was quiet, but her thoughts were anything but. By the time they pulled up in front of her building, she wasn't sure if the dizziness in her chest was from the wine, the kiss he'd given her on the terrace before they left, or the reality of what he'd just asked of her. Help him find a traitor. She rode the elevator up to her apartment in silence, kicked her heels off as soon as she walked in, and paced the length of her living room twice before stopping at the window. The city buzzed below, but she felt like she was standing on a ledge above it all. She should have been terrified. Instead, her nerves were sharpened by something else entirely purpose. The next morning, she walked into Fletcher Industries with a new resolve. Roman wasn't in yet, but a folder had been left on her desk. Inside was a single typed sheet with a list of names, 5 executives, each with clearance to the confidential merger documents. No explanations, no instructions, just the names, at the top in neat handwriting. Start here. She tucked the paper into her notebook and got to work. Over the next several days, Vivienne moved quietly. She asked questions with casual curiosity. She sat in on meetings, took notes, and made herself useful in ways that didn't raise suspicion. Roman didn't mention anything when they crossed paths, but there was a new awareness in his gaze now, a silent understanding passing between them every time their eyes met. On Thursday afternoon, she found herself alone with one of the names on the list, Miriam Thorne, VP of Strategic Planning. Miriam was precise, polished, and had a reputation for navigating negotiations like a chess master. Vivienne brought her the updated pitch deck Roman had asked for, and Miriam barely glanced up from her tablet. "Leave it on the corner," she said. "He probably won't use it." "He never sticks to slides," Vivienne hesitated. "You've worked with him a long time. Since before the board stopped seeing him as his father's son, he's become unpredictable in a bad way, in a dangerous way," Miriam said, finally meeting Vivienne's gaze. "He moves fast, takes risks. That merger, it's not clean. Too many moving parts. Someone's going to get burned." "Do you think it'll fall through?" Miriam's expression didn't change. "Deals like this don't fall apart, they get sabotaged." Vivienne left the office feeling like someone had poured cold water down her back. The way Miriam said it so certain, so calculated, made her wonder if the sabotage had already begun. Later that evening, Roman called her into his office. It was late. Most of the staff had cleared out, and the city lights outside threw soft reflections across the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Sit," he said, not looking up from his screen. "What did you find?" "Miriam's too polished," Vivienne said. "She's either hiding something or knows who is." Roman leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Did she mention anything about the timeline?" "She said the deal won't fall apart on its own. Someone's pushing it." He stood, crossed to the bar cart by the window, and poured 2 glasses of something dark and amber. When he handed her one, she didn't miss the way his fingers brushed hers longer than necessary. "You were right," he said. "The leak got worse. Numbers were pulled and rerouted through a shell firm. My name is on a document I never signed. Someone's forging your approval?" "Yes." "Which means they're close and they're confident." Vivienne held the glass but didn't drink. "Why tell me? Why not your legal team?" "Because I don't know who I can trust except you." She looked up at him, the weight of it hitting her. "You barely know me. I know how you think. I know you're not driven by money or power, and I know you'd never sell me out. That's more than I can say for anyone else here." She took a step closer. "Then let me help you, but I need full access." Roman's eyes flickered with something unreadable. "That comes with risk. I'm already involved." He nodded once, then walked to the wall safe behind a framed photo. She hadn't even noticed it before. He keyed in the code and pulled out a folder thicker than any she'd seen in the building. When he handed it to her, she knew it wasn't just strategy documents, it was everything. "They'll come after you if they suspect," he said. "Don't underestimate what's at stake. I'm not afraid of a boardroom full of snakes." He gave a short laugh, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "You should be." Vivienne spent the next 2 days combing through the files during off hours, compiling inconsistencies and highlighting discrepancies in timestamps and internal emails. It was late Saturday night when she found a calendar conflict showing Miriam in 2 locations at once. One was a Fletcher board meeting. The other, a private dinner with a man tied to a rival firm. She printed the page, circled the times, and texted Roman to meet her. But when she reached the lobby of the building, 2 men in suits were already waiting beside the elevator. "You're Vivienne Hart?" one asked. "Yes, why? You'll need to come with us." They flashed security credentials, Fletcher Industries, but something about it felt off. Roman wouldn't send people without warning her. She took a step back. "I wasn't told anyone would be meeting me, Mr. Fletcher requested your presence." "Then I'll call him to confirm." The taller man shifted. "That won't be necessary." Vivienne's fingers closed around the folder in her bag. "Then I'm not going anywhere." She turned on her heel and walked straight to the security desk, loudly asking to call up to Roman's office. The men didn't follow. By the time the guard dialed through, the suits had vanished. Roman's voice came through the speaker, clipped. "What happened?" "I think someone tried to intercept me. I'm coming down." When the elevator doors opened minutes later, Roman stepped out in a black coat, eyes scanning the lobby. He crossed to her fast, one hand on her arm as he steered her toward the private elevator. "Tell me exactly what they said." She did, and when she handed him the printed page, he barely blinked. "I knew it," he muttered. "Then it's Miriam," his jaw tightened. "She's not working alone." The elevator opened on the top floor. Roman led her into his office, locked the door behind them, and pulled the blinds closed. "There's a private board meeting happening Monday morning," he said. "They're planning to vote on removing me as CEO." Her stomach dropped. "What? They'll claim I falsified documents, misused funds." "It's all fabricated, but they've been building it for weeks." "Why would they do that?" "Because I refused to sell the company to a foreign investor they've been courting behind my back. Miriam wants the merger to collapse. She's betting on a fire sale." Vivienne stepped back, overwhelmed. "Roman, this is corporate warfare. It's a coup, and if I don't stop it by Monday, I lose everything." "Then what do we do?" Roman looked at her, and for the first time she saw something in his expression that wasn't steel or calculation. It was fear. He stepped toward her, gently brushing her hair from her face. "You stay close, you keep your head down, and you trust me." She nodded. "I'm going to fight for this company," he said. "But more than that, I'm going to fight for you." Vivienne didn't speak, she just reached for his hand. And held on. The boardroom was colder than usual, both in temperature and temperament. Roman stood at the head of the long obsidian table, his suit crisp, his expression unreadable. Every seat was filled 12 members, each with the kind of practiced neutrality that betrayed nothing and promised even less. Miriam sat near the center, poised, her hands folded neatly in her lap. To anyone watching, she looked like an executive prepared to conduct routine business. But Roman knew better. Vivienne stood just outside the glass wall, watching through the reflection-tinted partition. She wasn't allowed inside. Non-board members never were, but Roman had made sure she could see everything. She held the sealed envelope he'd given her earlier that morning, her fingers pressed tightly around it. Inside, Roman cleared his throat. "I've called this meeting to address the accusations circulated through private channels over the last week. My legal team has reviewed the claims, and I have a statement prepared." Miriam's voice cut through the air before he could continue. "I believe the board would prefer a vote. There's no need to drag this out with dramatics." Roman didn't look at her. "You'll get your vote. But you'll hear the evidence first." A few board members shifted in their seats. Miriam's mouth twitched, but she said nothing. Roman nodded toward the assistant standing near the audio system. "Play the file." There was a soft click, then the room filled with the sound of muffled conversation. It was a recording, low, static, overlapping voices. Then the dialogue became clear. "If you want the vote to go your way, you'll need to deliver the documents by Friday. I don't care if Fletcher's name is forged, we'll handle the legal fallout later." Vivienne could see the ripple it caused. Several members leaned forward. One dropped his pen. Roman waited until the recording ended before speaking. "That voice belongs to Richard Ames, CEO of Valemont Equity. The firm Miriam met with 6 weeks ago under the guise of a strategic dinner. What she didn't know is that the waitress she insulted was wearing a wire." All eyes snapped to Miriam. She didn't blink. "This is absurd. That recording could be fabricated." Roman held up a folder. "We ran a voice pattern analysis through 3 independent labs. There's a signed affidavit from a forensic audio specialist inside. You're welcome to review it." Silence swallowed the room. Roman's voice dropped an octave. "You tried to sell this company out from under me, Miriam. You manipulated internal systems, falsified approvals, and coordinated with outside interests to undermine a merger that would have benefited all of us." She stood abruptly. "This is a distraction. He's flailing. The merger is reckless. The merger is already complete," Roman said. "We signed it this morning." Gasps broke the silence. Miriam froze. He turned to the board. "You can vote if you want, but make no mistake, Miriam's position is no longer secure. Her access has been revoked, and legal is preparing charges as we speak." The head of the board, an older man with silver hair and a voice like gravel, cleared his throat. "I think that concludes our emergency session." Miriam didn't speak again. She walked out, heels clicking hard against the marble, face pale. Roman didn't relax until the doors closed. Downstairs, Vivienne waited near the executive lounge, the envelope still clutched in her hand. When she saw him approaching, she stood. "It's done," he said. "You're still standing, so I guess that much," she replied. He exhaled slowly, the weight of weeks finally visible in his shoulders. "I never asked what was it like, watching from the outside." Vivienne handed him the envelope. "Like watching someone walk a tightrope with no net." Roman opened it. Inside was the original calendar conflict. Vivienne had found the one that started it all. He looked at it for a moment, then tucked it into his jacket. "You saved me," he said quietly. "You saved yourself," she corrected. "I just handed you the matches." Roman stepped closer. The hallway was empty, the office hushed in the aftermath of chaos. "I'm not used to needing people," he said, "but I need you." Vivienne's throat tightened. "Is that your way of saying you're in love with me?" His lips curved, not into a smile, but something quieter. "I didn't plan on falling for you. You walked into my office with a notebook I didn't even realize I'd lost, and somehow everything after that stopped making sense without you in it." Vivienne took a breath that felt like it reached her bones. "I thought you were a storm when I met you." "I am," he said, voice low. "But you're the one who walked into it anyway." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, black velvet box. No grand speeches, no dramatic kneeling, just him standing there, offering it to her like it was the only thing he'd ever been sure about. She opened it slowly. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, with a sapphire surrounded by diamonds. "I know this is fast," he said, "but I've lived my whole life waiting for things to be safe or smart or approved. And I've never wanted anything more than I want to wake up knowing you're mine." Vivienne stared at the ring, then up at him. "You don't play it safe, that's not who you are." "I do when it matters," he said, "and you matter." She didn't hesitate. "Yes." The word slipped out before she could think, before she could question. Before the past or logic or fear had a chance to speak. Roman didn't kiss her right away. He just looked at her, like he'd finally found something he didn't have to chase to hold on to. Later that week, the wedding was quiet and private, just close friends, a rooftop garden, and a city skyline as their backdrop. Roman wore a midnight blue suit. Vivienne wore ivory. There were no reporters, no press releases, no board members, just them. When they danced, he leaned close and whispered, "Still think I'm a storm?" She smiled against his shoulder. "I think you're the reason I finally stopped standing in the rain." And when the music faded and the world outside kept spinning, they stood still, two people who never should have met, bound by a forgotten notebook and a choice to trust when neither of them had reason to. But sometimes, love finds you not because you're looking for it, but because you're exactly where you're meant to be when it does. Vivienne adjusted the strap of her dress as she stepped onto the sun-drenched balcony of their Amalfi Coast villa. A warm breeze pulled strands of her hair across her face, and below them, the sea sparkled like molten glass. Roman stood barefoot near the railing, his shirt sleeves rolled up, a glass of blood orange juice in his hand. She slid her arms around his waist from behind and rested her cheek against his back. "You're up early." "I couldn't sleep," he said without turning. "I kept thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't gone back for that notebook." Vivienne smiled, pressing a kiss between his shoulder blades. "Then I'd probably be writing cover letters in a studio apartment and wondering why I keep falling for fictional billionaires." Roman turned to face her, his expression softer now than it had ever been in the office, his edges smoothed by the quiet of the coastline and the woman in his arms. "You never fell for fiction, you fell for me despite the mess." "You weren't the mess," she said, brushing her fingers down the front of his chest. "The people around you were, you never let them dim you." He tilted his head. "You did more than see me. You held me together through it." They spent the morning in quiet companionship, the kind that didn't require conversation. They explored the local market, wandering through rows of fig trees and stalls selling handmade ceramics. Roman bought her a delicate gold bracelet from a woman who didn't speak a word of English, communicating only through smiles and gestures. He didn't ask the price. He simply fastened it around Vivienne's wrist and kissed her knuckles like it was the most natural thing in the world. That evening, they dined on the rooftop of a small, family-run restaurant overlooking the sea. The owner brought out plates himself, insisting they try his specialty. Lemon risotto drizzled with olive oil pressed that morning. Roman raised an eyebrow when Vivienne finished her second glass of wine with an uncharacteristic giggle. "I like this version of you," he said. "Tipsy and bold." "I'm always bold," she said, lifting her chin. He laughed, a deep sound she rarely heard but always loved. "You're right. You were the only person in my life brave enough to say no to me. You asked me to spy for you," she teased. "You said yes." She leaned closer. "I said yes to a lot more than that." Back at the villa, the air had cooled. Roman lit the fireplace while Vivienne changed into one of his button-down shirts and curled up on the couch. He joined her a moment later, pulling her into his lap as if she belonged there, and she did. "I spoke to the board this morning," he said, his voice low. "They've agreed to restructure operations. No more unchecked power, no more backroom deals. I'm stepping back from day-to-day control." Vivienne looked up at him in surprise. "You're walking away, not from the company, just from micromanaging every inch of it." "I built something good, but I want to live too, with you." She traced the line of his collar. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything. I want mornings that start like this. Evenings where I'm not checking stock projections while you fall asleep next to me." "And what about the legacy your father left you?" Roman exhaled. "I've honored it, but I don't have to become him to do that. I can make my own rules now." Vivienne's heart swelled. "What do we do next?" "We build something of our own. You said you wanted to write again." She blinked. "That was a lifetime ago." "No, it was 3 months ago in the back of a car after a board dinner. You didn't think I remembered. You were half asleep." "I was listening," he said. "You were talking about a story, a woman who finds herself when she least expects it." Vivienne rested her forehead against his. "I never finished it." "Then maybe it's time," he whispered. She kissed him, slow and deep, and they stayed wrapped in each other until the fire burned low. 3 months later, they moved into a townhouse in Notting Hill, quiet, ivy-covered, and filled with light. Roman flew back for quarterly meetings, but the company ran smoothly under new leadership, and he didn't miss it. Not once. Vivienne spent her days writing. Not pitches or emails, but chapters, pages filled with characters who made mistakes and found love anyway. Her first manuscript was almost done when Roman surprised her with a converted study, complete with a vintage typewriter, a leather armchair, and a desk facing the garden. One morning, she stepped into the kitchen to find him reading a printed version of her latest chapter. "You're not supposed to read that yet," she said, moving to grab it. He held it out of reach. "You wrote about us." "I fictionalized it," she said, cheeks flushing. "Vivienne, the main character, is named Roman Fletcher, creative license." He pulled her against him. "Marry me again," she blinked. "What? We never had a real wedding. No guests, no vows, just a rooftop and a signature." "I thought you liked that it was just us." "I did," he said. "But now I want the world to know," she softened. "You're serious. I want the dress, the music, your mother crying in the front row. I want to stand in front of everyone we love and tell them that falling in love with you was the smartest thing I ever did." Vivienne kissed him, long and lingering. "Then let's do it." 6 weeks later, in a vineyard in Provence, surrounded by friends, Roman and Vivienne stood beneath a canopy of white roses and promised each other forever. There were tears, laughter. A moment where the wind caught her veil and carried it into the sky, and Roman chased it like a man possessed. They danced barefoot under string lights until the stars came out. Roman whispered something in her ear that made her laugh so hard she nearly dropped her champagne flute. When he kissed her that night, it wasn't the first kiss or the last, it was the one that said they'd already lived a lifetime together, and still, the best parts were ahead. Years passed, but the story never faded. Vivienne's first book spent 12 weeks on the bestseller list. Roman invested in a startup that built libraries in underserved communities. Their townhouse filled with books, music, and eventually, the sound of small feet running across the hardwood floors. They didn't chase perfection, they lived honestly, boldly, deeply. And every morning, Roman still brought her coffee with a pressed flower tucked under the cup. Not because he had to, but because he remembered, because he always would.